Hello everyone, so in this video I will talk to you about how I improve my English accent, because if you don't know who I am not English, I am French and Portuguese, and how you can also use some of the tips that I've used to improve your own accent in the language you are learning, whichever it is. So I know this type of video has been done by lots and lots of polyglots on YouTube and elsewhere, but I hope these tips will be useful to you anyway, and that they won't be a repetition of what you've heard somewhere else, if that makes sense. Before I actually start the video though, I just want to specify that I don't think my accent in English is perfect, because obviously it's not perfect, but the video is not about having a perfect accent, but more about having a good accent so that people can understand you, comfortably well. But anyway, let's crack on now. So one of the things I will say to start this video is that when you want to improve your accent, what you need to do is listen to a lot of input in the target language. And this is sort of obvious to a lot of people, I'm sure, but actually, not a lot of people actually, make sure they have a lot of input in their target language. They kind of hope for their pronunciation to just magically be better by practicing every now and then, occasionally. But actually, this is something you have to do very regularly. Some of the things you can do is listen to TV shows, watch TV shows rather, listen to podcasts, listen to music, have actual conversations with people that speak your target language, etc., etc. This is very important because this is actually something that I had to learn as a teacher during my training, is that for your students to produce language in general, they have to get input. So yeah, it's definitely something that is important, I think, to practice your pronunciation. A couple of things you can use to also improve your pronunciation is things like Google Translate. So not for translation, because I think it's a terrible idea to use Google Translate for translation, but the text-to-speech software is actually very good and the quality of the sound is very clear. So if you need to type a word or a sentence, I think it's quite a reliable tool to practice pronunciation. You can also use pronunciation dictionaries, which is what I've done when I was learning English. I used a lot of pronunciation dictionaries because you could listen to the different accents, British and American accents. So that was definitely useful for me to practice specific words. And when you use pronunciation dictionaries, also do repeat the words. Don't be shy to, repeat and sound a bit silly at the beginning, but try to imitate the pronunciation. I think it's quite important to do that as well. Otherwise, you don't really practice, you're just listening. But what you want to do is actually activate your mouth and the muscles in there. Another thing I would say is that stick to an accent or variety of your target language. What I mean is, for example, me, when I was learning English, I decided that I would sound more British than American, so I stuck to British pronunciation, or, I tried to get as close as possible to it. And I think that's something you should do as well. Having said that, I don't think there is one accent you should follow at all. I think it's all about the context in which you will speak the language. So let's say you are learning French, and you are mostly going to be around people from France, or maybe you're going to work in France, then I think it makes sense for you to have a standard French accent. But if you think you're going to travel to African countries, countries where French is spoken, then I think it would make sense for you to maybe, work more towards, African Frenches, if you can say that. I mean, the only limitation, I guess, would be to find the material for it. But if the material is available, then there is nothing wrong with you choosing an accent that is not what most people choose, if that makes sense. Like, any accent is acceptable. And people that say that is a bad accent are stupid, and there's no linguistic basis for that. So yeah, choose an accent and stick to it. Kind of drawing upon what I said about pronunciation dictionaries, I think one thing that can be very useful when you want to learn a language is to know the IPA, so International Phonetics Alphabet. I will show you an example of what the British English alphabet looks like on here, probably. So roughly speaking, the IPA is a sort of alphabet or language, if you will, but of sounds. The good thing about this alphabet is that once you can read it fluently, whenever you look at a dictionary where you will see transcriptions using the IPA symbols, then you will be able to pronounce a word without any ambiguity, as long as you know the alphabet well. And this is very useful because some words in English, for example, are very regular in terms of writing, so the writing will not always match the pronunciation, or will not sound like you would expect them to. So that is very useful for that. And once I learned the IPA myself, it was very useful because I didn't have to always listen to a word, just reading a transcript, I was able to pronounce a word properly in English. So yeah, that really helped me personally to improve my English pronunciation because I could practice much quicker instead of having to listen to the word, looking it up on the internet or something. If I have a dictionary, I can pronounce any word and read the transcription, in English, and that's much easier. Obviously, I know not all of you will make the effort of doing it, but I do think it's a great advantage to be able to read the IPA. Now, you don't necessarily have to be able to write it. I don't think it's useful unless you're going to study linguistics of that language, but just being able to read it is definitely useful and will go a long way, I think. So once you've applied all the things I've talked about so far, the next step, in my opinion, is to be aware of the position of your mouth, teeth, tongue, throat, anything around your mouth, you know, because this is basically how sounds are pronounced or realized. And what it means is that when you pronounce words, you need to be aware that you need to change the position of your tongue, mouth, throat, everything to be able to pronounce a word. And one way it's actually very useful to know that is, for example, in my case, when obviously I'm a native speaker of French and also Portuguese, but French as well, I had to be aware that to pronounce English sounds, I could not have the same positions of tongue, mouth, etc. That I had in French, so I had to change them. So being able to kind of test, you know, it's not about, you know, knowing exactly where it is, how you have to place everything in there, but it's more about the fact that you need to be aware that there needs to be some change for you to get closer to a sound you're trying to achieve. Obviously, you could get into much more detail and actually look into the phonology of a language, but I think that's a bit too advanced. You know, super interesting anyway, so if you do want to do that, then do. But if you just want to be a casual learner, I would just say be aware of the fact that you need to kind of change things around to be able to pronounce a word, and if you use the same positions, you know, realization positions than in your native language, it won't work. You will, you know, have a very strong accent, and this is actually why people have an accent, because they're not using the right positions to pronounce the words. So at this point already, you should know a little bit about the basics of how pronunciation works and how you can practice it. But another thing you should be able to do, and you should do in fact, is to record yourself. But it's not just about recording yourself, it's also about you comparing the pronunciation of what you recorded, so your pronunciation, to something else, maybe a dictionary, you know, a text-to-speech software such as Google Translate that I mentioned earlier, and be able to kind of compare where you've gone right and when you've gone wrong, basically. And I think this is very important if you're studying on your own. You know, if you have the opportunity to be with a native speaker, then obviously that can be also quite good. But if you don't have that native speaker, especially for rarer languages, then it's definitely a good tool to be able to record yourself. You know, use your phone, use a voice recorder, use your computer, integrated mic, anything. And I think that will go a long way, because this way you will be able to know which sounds you struggle the most with, and you will know your weaknesses in general and also your strengths. So I think it's quite good to reflect on your mistakes and also what you do well. And the last thing I will mention in this video is that you have to pay attention to the particularities of the language you are learning. Some languages, such as English, have what we call a stress. If I give you an example, let's say the word computer, you wouldn't say computer, you would say computer. So you have some kind of rising tone, and it can be at different you know, places in the word or in the sentence. But you know, other languages don't have these, so it's not always applicable. But English anyway, and also Chinese, has that kind of system where you have to have you know, put stresses in the right place, or tones in English, I think is more accurate. So if that language you're learning has this sort of particularity, I cannot say that word properly, then it is important to pay attention to them and also work on them, because in many cases mispronouncing these things will actually change the meaning of the word. A good example in English is if you say dessert and desert, if it's exactly the same word, you know, there's one S in one, two in the other, but regardless, it is sort of written the same, and if you don't have the right stress in the word, it will actually change the meaning from dessert to desert. Yeah, I don't know for Chinese because I don't speak Chinese, but I'm sure it's the same thing, you know, it's the same situation really. So yeah, that is it for today. I hope you found this video helpful and you will be able to apply some of these tips. Let me know if you have any comments and or questions in general, and I'll be happy to answer them. I don't say that enough, but I also have a Twitter page and a Facebook page, so do feel free to follow them. They will be in the description below. And yeah, I think that is it for today, and I will see you later. Bye!